In this video, we're going to talk about harmonization. Harmonization is the process of adding chords or triads in particular to a melody. So remember, a melody is the part that you leave singing after you've gone to a concert. It's the part of a piece of music that sticks in your head. Usually the melody can be written just in the treble clef or just in the bass clef, and it is one note at a time with the notes following one after the other. Think about in a song the part that the soloist would sing, or maybe a part that an instrumentalist would play as their solo. That's usually the melody. Sopranos have the melody often, violins usually have melody a lot in an orchestra. So here's an example of a plain old melody, and then I'm going to show you what it sounds like with harmonization or triads, and then we're going to find out and learn how to write in triads for your own melody that you will write. So here's Merrily We Roll Along. Sounds a lot like Mary Had a Little Lamb without any harmony, just the melody. One note at a time. Okay, so now this is in the key of C. This song actually does not start on the tonic, it starts on the median or the third scale degree, it starts on an E. But even though it starts on the median or the third scale degree, we're usually always in a song going to start with a tonic triad, which is the same as a 1 if we remember in our primary chords. So the first measure has a 1 triad or a C-E-G triad at the beginning. And see how much more lush it sounds? And that was another 1 in the second measure. Now in the third measure, the melody note is a D. Now a C-E-G chord with a D, actually that doesn't sound that bad, but what they have done instead of putting that in there is putting a 5 chord, which is a G-B-D chord. Since the melody note has a D in there, we put a 5 chord, which is G-B-D, then we have the G in the melody and there's a G in the triad, so they have a matching note. So let's hear what that sounds like. Here's the 5 chord. Oh, very nice. Now this goes back to a 1 chord, a 1 chord again, another 1 chord, now a 5 chord, and that 5-1 is a common ending or a cadence because that dominant chord kind of leads your ear back to the tonic chord or triad. Now you'll notice that that was just harmonized using a 1 and a 5. Often songs will just be harmonized using 1, 4, and 5, those primary triads, since every single note of the scale is represented in one of those primary triads. So what you can do very easily to harmonize a melody is look at what your melody note is and find one of those primary triads that has the same matching note, and then that's the triad that you'll use as your harmony if they have a matching letter name or note from the melody and that triad. Sometimes if, for instance, in the key of C, if your melody note was a G, a 1 chord has a C-E-G, but a 5 chord also has a G-B-D. So sometimes you can choose between one or another triad. And now if you wanted to make it minor, you could then choose from the minor diatonic triads, which would be the 2, the 3, the 6. If you chose a 7, that's going to be diminished. So hopefully your piece, that's something that you're aiming for, is that diminished sound. But again, if it's major, 1, 4, 5 is all that you need. Here's a piece that's harmonized with just 1, 4, 5, and you might be familiar with this, but it's for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. So this starts, it's again in C, so this starts with a 1 chord, 4 chord, back to a 1, 5, 1 chord, 1, 4, stays with a 4, 1, 5, 1. So you'll notice that was just 1, 4, 5, 1, and often there are just 1s, 4s, and 5s in probably a lot of pieces you hear on the radio. And I've created a playlist on YouTube with some songs that are just using 1s, 4s, and 5s. Also blues progression, a lot of jazz blues music uses just 1, 4, and 5. There's a certain number of measures that go to a 1, then it goes to a 4, 5, sometimes it goes back to a 4, always goes back to a 1. It's a certain order called a progression that's always used in the 12-bar blues. So that kind of shows you in hearing what harmony sounds like with a melody. Now I'm going to show you on the staff board how you can use triads to harmonize your own melody. All right, now I'm going to show you on the staff how you're going to write in those triads to harmonize your melody. Now this melody you did not write, but this is just the merrily we roll along. roll along, roll along. Sounds a lot like Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now this is in the key of C, but you'll notice that this starts on what? It starts on an E. Now in the key of C, you're always, like I said earlier, you're always going to want to start on a 1 tonic triad and you're going to end on a 1, okay? And since we're in the key of C, why don't we go ahead and write out what those primary triads would be. So a 1 triad would be my C, E, G. A 4, remember, is going to start on F, the subdominant, the 4th scale degree. So a 4 is going to be F, A, C. And a 5 is going to start on the dominant. So it's going to be a G, B, D. Notice, every single note in the C scale is represented by one of these primary triads. Here's my C, here's my D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So no matter what you write, if this was your key, no matter where your melody went, if you stayed in your key of C, you can use one of these primary triads. Are you allowed to go outside your key in your melody? Yes, you are. You can add in some sharps or some flats, but I would maybe not do that at the beginning of a measure, or else your primary triads aren't going to sound as good. But let's go ahead and harmonize this. Now again, even though this is starting on the mediant, we're going to still use that 1 triad. And guess what? It's starting on the E, and that 1 triad has an E in it. So this is what I played for you on the piano earlier. This is my C, E, G, which would be a 1. So there, we're done with that measure. Now let's look at the next measure. The first note of this one is also an E. So hey, it's going to be the same triad. We're going to put another C, E, G right there. Now in the next measure, this one has a D at the beginning. So which triad up here, the 1, the 4, or the 5, has a D in it? There's only one. So it's going to be my 5 chord. So my 5 is a G, B, D, and I could put it down here. Now a way that it often gets written is not like this in root position. A lot of times when you'll see those inversions is in piano music, because the inversion would make it easier to play. Rather than having to jump from this C, E, G way down to this G, B, D, or way up to that G, B, D, they'll write it in an inversion. So they'll take this G and stick it up there. And then those notes are a lot closer together and you have less hands and less fingers to move around while still retaining that that is a 5 chord. But I digress. It doesn't matter if you write it in plain old root position GBD, that's totally fine. Just wanted to kind of bring back the inversions. All right, next measure, we have an E, G, G. So there's that E, same thing. There's only one chord that has an E in it, or one triad, that's the C, E, G, so we can put my C, E, G. Now, if we wanted to, we could harmonize more than just having one per measure, but that is the only minimum requirement for your Project 5, is to have at least one triad per measure. If you wanted to have more triads, you could, rather than just harmonizing with that first note, you could choose a triad to go with every single one of those notes. You could choose more triads than that. You could have 8 notes down here and have a whole bunch of harmony in your bass clef. It's up to you and how complicated you want to get. But remember, sometimes less can be more. But again, if we wanted to add in more, instead of having this be whole notes, we could change this into quarter notes. And then you could put another note or another triad to go with the D, which we would want to choose the 5 chord. So you could have a 5 chord that would go with that. There's my C. We could go back to the 1 chord. Or we could put in a 4 chord, since 4 has F, A, C. And now notice, we did not harmonize this with any 4 chords, but if my melody happened to change from being Mary Had a Little Lamb or Merrily We Roll Along, if my melody went, well, I'll just erase that one right there. If my melody happened to go to an F right there, and then maybe a G, we'll just have a variation on Mary Had a Little Lamb here. But if that was an F right there, that's when we would choose that 4 chord. Now remember, there are other triads besides just the 1, 4, 5. Remember, we have a 2, we have a 3, we have a 6, and then we have that diminished 7th. In the key of C, a 2 chord is going to start on the 2nd scale degree, and it's going to be a D, F, A. Remember, since it's lowercase, it's minor. So maybe if your lamb was sick, you could put a minor chord in there. Mary had a really sick lamb. Just kidding. But if you wanted to have a minor sound, or maybe your song had you're writing it in a major key, but you want it to have a little emotional part in there. That's when you would maybe want to add in some of those minor triads. So if you wanted to put a 2, you could have a DFA. A 3 would be an EGB. What would a 6 have the root as? Think about the 6th scale degree in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, A. So a 6 is going to be an A, C, E, and then a 7, which is diminished, is going to be your B, D, F chord. So again, if you want it to have a really dark sound or whatever you feel that diminished chord triad adds in, you could add in a 7th in there. So you're welcome to use the rest of these diatonic triads. But again, many, 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 many songs you hear on the radio and what I just played and that are in a lot of piano books are just harmonized with 1, 4, 5, because those are the major ones that have, like I said, every single note from the scale. Now this was an example using C. So if this was clear to you, I suggest writing your melody for Project 4 and doing it in C. If you chose a different key, the process works the exact same way. But remember, if you're in the key of F, you're going to write your melody with your starting note as your tonic or F. It's going to end on F. Your 1 chord is not going to be a C, E, G. Your 1 chord is going to be an F, A, C. Your 4 chord is going to be different. So depending on your key, your 1, 4, and 5 would need to be adjusted for your key. And you can refer back to those primary triad worksheets that you did a billion of those, where you were labeling the 1s, 4s, and 5s for a lot of different keys. So if you chose a different key, which you're certainly welcome to do, that's what you would need to do. Now, if you chose to write your melody in minor, look in your book and look at those differences between the diatonic triads in a minor key. In a minor key, your 1 is not major, your 1 chord is going to be a minor. You still want to start and end on a 1, and your 4 and 5 are going to be your other minors, and then look at the rest of those, and you're welcome to use those if you choose to do a minor key. So that gives you kind of an overview. But again, the easiest method, look at your melody, start with your melody. Make sure your melody is good on its own. Once you've got that melody, find a note that matches it, that is in one of those primary triads, stick it in the bottom in the bass clef, and make sure you have at least 1 triad per measure. Other options are to use inversions. You can do arpeggios, which means you separate the notes out. Instead of it being like a C, G, E, G block chord, it could go C, E, G, or you could have it be in block format. You can add an extra tone. So like if you want C, E, G, and you want a middle C up there, just to kind of give it that high, or if you wanted to add in, since this is a higher G, if you wanted to add in a low G there, you can add in extra tones to give it those highs and lows if you like that particular sound in your piece. So have fun, and I look forward to seeing and hearing all of your pieces.